Welcome to the Ground Jewels. My name is James Dixon, and I'm delighted you've joined us again this week for the podcast that celebrates the sporting places that are special in someone's life. This week we're joined by the writer and podcaster Jen Offord. Jen, some of you will know from the Standard Issue podcast, a fantastic podcast that was set up like the Standard Issue magazine by Sarah Millican originally. She's very funny, she's very thoughtful, and she's very into us. And I guess this has come to her, as you'll see from the interview, a little bit later in life. And she's sort of embracing everything, just as we all are in terms of being a sports fan. And her particular passion is for Charlton. She's written a book, a really fantastic book as well, called The Year of the Robin, which chronicles Charlton's 2019-2020 season. It's obviously the COVID season, and for Charlton, it's the season that they are relegated from the Championship. So really interesting time to be chronicling the club. Of course, it goes back and looks at the history of the club, the Kirbishley years and before them. And one of the reasons why I want to talk about the Valley is it was an abandoned ground for 6 years. Charlton had to leave the Valley in the mid-80s. Didn't get back there until 1992. And the story of how they get back there and the importance of that ground to that community, it involves setting up a political party to challenge the local council. A phenomenal undertaking from the Charlton Athletic Supporters Trust and all the fans involved with Charlton. It's really, really special. It's always interesting to talk to people from fan bases when their club is threatened or has been threatened. I think you find a sort of new appreciation. I can see, Torquay fans at the moment absolutely ecstatic because they're going to have a club. All right, they're in the National League South. In years gone by, they might have been a League One or League Two club, but they have a club, and keeping the club and keeping the ground. And when you're forced out of your home like Charlton were, getting back there feels really, really significant. So Jen's great. She's a really fantastic interview. We talk about a lot of things. There's a lot of personal stuff in this, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Regular listeners will know we try and do a little bit of stadium news before we dive into our interview. And this week we've got a couple of stories relating to climate change. Not least the Rose Bowl, which we discussed last week with Artif Nawaz. The Rose Bowl Stadium in Southampton has plans to install over 1,000 solar panels, and that's been given the green light. The panels will go on the roof of the 5 buildings at the what is currently known as the Utility Bowl, but let's be honest, the Rose Bowl, and is looking to generate about 25% of the stadium's annual power. So, really kind of good sustainability initiative there from Hampshire and the Rose Bowl. If you do want to hear more about the Rose Bowl, do go back and check out last week's episode with Artif. It was really good. Really enjoyed the feedback that you guys had for that as well. So thank you for that. In other news, World Rugby this week produced a report on climate change, and they said Gloucester's Kingsholm Stadium was at risk of submerging due to climate change. So we know the sort of drainage and flood issues with that part of the world. Gloucester Football Club were playing away from home for a long, long time after repeated flooding. There's issues in Worcestershire with New Road, and they're looking at another ground because of that. But it is an issue that we're going to have to tackle all around the world. If we are seeing rising sea levels, more climate change, more rainfall, and sport just will not be immune from it. So some of the, Gloucester, what a ground. Great historic ground, terracing as well. You can stand, you can have a beer on the side of the pitch, you can go to Teague's Bar, all the great sort of pubs around the stadium. It would be an absolute tragedy to lose Kingsholm, which Gloucester have played at since 1891. So, I'm not saying that we should save the planet for sports grounds in low-lying areas, but we should save the planet. And as a side benefit, we should hopefully get to enjoy some of these iconic venues that for many more years to come. Anyway, let's get to our interview. So today on the Grand Jewels, we are joined by Jen Offord. You may know her from the Standard Issue podcast or her fantastic book, The Year of the Robin, which chronicles the story of the 2019-2020 Charlton Athletic season and a little bit more besides that. Jen, welcome to the Grand Jewels.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
We're absolutely delighted. Would you be offended if I said the Valley was cute?
No, I think that's nice. I mean, it's a bit patronising, but I take it. I think the Valley is it's a lovely little place. It's a lovely little stadium in southeast London. We're very proud of it. Us Charlton fans, we're very proud of the Valley, and people talk very fondly of it. You know, people who aren't Charlton fans speak very fondly of their experiences there as well. So no, I'll take that in the spirit in which it's intended.
It is intended that because I genuinely think it's a lovely stadium. I think it's the right sort of size for a stadium as well. It's big enough to feel important, but it's not so big that you're too far from the action. I think currently it's got a capacity of about 27,000, and maybe my experience is clouded because the only time I've been to the Valley was in gorgeous August sunshine, and it was just
Mm.
the perfect day till the sort of start of the season. It was Charlton versus Scunthorpe in sometime in the 2000s. It dates it, doesn't it, because of how far Scunthorpe have fallen since then. But it was
Yeah.
I just remember having such a lovely time. And maybe I'm wrong because I'm not from South East London. I'm not from London at all. I think people are quite warm towards Charlton, and people quite like Charlton as a club.
Yeah, I mean that's always been my experience, and it does have that kind of like I don't know, almost like a cute reputation. I think there's something about Charlton Athletic that has like real heart. I think because you think about everything that the club has been through, and you think about the times that it's been brought back from the brink, quite a few times now. And as you said in the sort of preamble to this, it had an actual political party formed uh, to save it at one point. So it does have this like quite amazing history. And I think the club is like, whenever I tell someone that I support Charlton Athletic, there's like two standard responses. One is like, oh, they kind of like tilt their head and they're like, oh, that's nice. Oh, I like that you support Charlton Athletic. Or um, they say that they had a friend or a friend of a friend or like a cousin who was in Charlton's Youth Academy. That's like a very common thing that I seem to hear. Almost everyone in London knows someone who's been through Charlton's Youth Academy, apparently.
Oh well, Southeast London is a hotbed of footballing talent. So yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
it's. But we will get to the history. But maybe let's explore a little bit of personal history because my question would be when if you told me you were a Charlton fan, my first question is why? What's the story there in terms of becoming a fan of the Addicks?
Yeah, so I grew up in Essex, North Essex, so like the closest sort of football club to where I grew up is Ipswich Town, sadly, or Colchester United. And but I was born in the glamorous location of Sidcup, and we lived in Charlton for the first like 5, 6 years of my life. And we lived on Delafield Road, which is like right next to the like train tracks. So anyone who's leaving the valley is like totted down Delafield Road to sort of wait to be let into the station after the match in a big crush of people. And so we grew up like we well no we lived like a stone's throw from the valley basically. And but the valley wasn't actually operational at that time. This is when the valley was closed and Charlton played at Selhurst Park, and I think for a period of time they played at West Ham as well. So we were out of the valley for quite a long period of time. And there's like, I don't know, my brothers seem to get their hands on, and like the story is that my eldest brother had like broken into the box off, like the disused box office with his mates and excuse me, with his friends, and like pilfered a few old programs or something. But I don't, like, my mum and dad didn't really let us play like that, so I don't think that's true. I think someone else's older brother probably did that. But anyway, we ended up with these like Charlton Athletic programs, which my brother Michael kept hold of. And so we moved to Essex, and I kind of like dabbled with a few different teams. I supported Manchester United for a small, like very brief period of time because Mark Owen did.
Mark Owen from Take That.
Mark Owen from Take That. Yeah, so that's so that places my age range like quite obviously there.
You could have been a Port Vale fan because of Robbie, couldn't you? I suppose.
I know, but who wants to do that?
Okay.
So yeah, so I supported Manchester United for a little bit, and then I supported. I don't like to admit to this, but I did support Ipswich very, very briefly. But then my middle brother Michael started supporting Charlton, which I think he did as a kind of like weird sort of identity thing, almost, to be like, I'm different to you guys. I support Charlton Athletic. And Charlton Athletic back then, they were in the second tier, so they were in what was then League One and is now the Championship. And so we kind of like, I don't know, we're sort of like always around the same sort of position as Ipswich. We were always kind of like in the league, and we crossed over a bit. We got promoted, and then like we got relegated, and they got promoted, and then we got promoted again, and all of that kind of went on for a bit. And so my sort of story of Charlton Athletic really starts probably in the season before 98 when they got promoted for the first time. And the reason for it basically was because I was contrary. I was a contrary teenager, and I thought that supporting Charlton Athletic in a town full of Ipswich Town fans would make me terribly exotic. So that is basically the reason. I was just really contrarian. I liked beefing with Ipswich fans.
That's lovely. I suppose in a way, being a Charlton Athletic fan does make you kind of exotic.
Well, you don't meet too many of them, do you?
No, you don't. That's amazing. So you're getting into Charlton after they've come back to the Valley. And I said we'd do the history, and now's as good a time as any, because I guess the Valley at one point held a huge number of people, like pre and post war. Apparently, you could get about 75,000. I guess just standing on the banks, and because it's that natural valley type thing. The club record is 75,000 supporters in against Villa in an FA Cup game from the 30s. Don't expect you to know that. That's absolutely fine. But by the time it was by the mid 80s, the average attendance, which peaked at 40,000 just after the war, is down to 5,000. And you've got this sort of schism between the ownership of the stadium and the ownership of the club. I know that's something that's a live issue for Charlton as well now. And you're away for those 7 years. And as you allude to it, the club and the supporters want to move back to the Valley, but they're having some issues with the local council, and the supporters of the club formed their own political party to put pressure to get back to the Valley. That must, and I know you're saying you come back in the night, but that come in the late 90s, but that must be a huge part of the sort of mythos and mythology of the club in terms of how you thought to get back there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge. It was a huge big deal. The council, I can't really remember what the council's problem with it was. I think it was just like, football clubs people don't want, because it's right, it's in the middle of like a very residential area, as, a lot of stadiums are in London. But and
it's just after Hillsborough. We're not very popular at the time in the 80s, football fans.
Yeah. And so there's all this sort of stuff about hooliganism and et cetera, et cetera. So I think the council weren't like enormously keen to host, thousands of football fans every week, but people really, really wanted it back. And there's a kind of like huge piece there around, the club considers that it basically lost like a generation of fans because of the closure of it. Because in that, I think it's about 8 years that we're out of the Valley for. And in that period of time, any kids growing up in the local area are like, well, I'm going to support Arsenal, I'm going to support Spurs, I'm going to support Chelsea. You've got a bunch of local clubs, or clubs that are near enough that are actually doing quite well. So, why would you stick with this team that you have to sort of fanny around to go and see as well, that aren't, that aren't performing as well? So I think there's a really big thing there, and they've put a huge amount of effort into getting kids in the local area involved in the club, and sort of taking the attitude that, like, if we can't be your number one team, what if we could be your second team, kind of thing. So they've had to make a huge effort to kind of claw back some support. And I think it is, it really does show when you go to the Valley as well. The crowd is like predominantly sort of white, middle-aged man kind of, there's not so many young people there. Like I always feel like quite young when I go to the Valley. So it has caused like big problems for them, that time away from the Valley. And I think people felt really strongly about it. And it was just sitting there going to ruin, basically. And it's sad to see, isn't it? So people, they had fans that kind of like went along and cleared up the pitch and all of this stuff. And it's an incredible story, because they formed this party, as you say. And what happened in the end was, okay, like they didn't win, they didn't win the local election, but they got enough votes to kind of like put the wind up the Labour candidates, who were sort of pretty safe in that area. They basically split the Labour votes in the local area, and it was enough for them to be like, oh, we're a bit worried about this. And then what actually happened, I forget the name of the councillor, but it's all in my book, if anyone wants to read about it in more detail. But basically what happens is there's a punch up on the on the steps of the town hall, or wherever the vote is held, on the night of the election, between like one of the councillors and someone from the Valley Party, and someone ends up like, spending a night in the cells. So it's like, it's all very dramatic, and like, it's sort of quite a fun story in a way, but also, I think it really is kind of testament to the heart, I think, or as I see it, of Charlton fans.
So let's go back to sort of your sort of personal story. You're getting involved, I think you said sort of 97, 98, that season. And is that when are you still at that point sort of becoming invested from afar, or are you starting to go to the Valley then? Because that's the season that ends with one of the great sort of playoff finals. I know that's not at the Valley, but if you watch that game against Sunderland with any sort of inkling for Charlton, and you're not tingly and moved by all of that stuff, football's not for you, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great story, and obviously the playoff final in 2019 is another like beautiful moment in the history of Charlton Athletic. But yeah, so I didn't go to my first match at the Valley until 2001. And the reason for that is because, I was like 14, 15 in the season, in the 97-98 season. And so I was like a bit young to be going to. My dad wasn't interested in football. My brother was sort of old enough to be going like by himself by that point, or with his mates. But I was like a bit young.
Not wanting to take his sister along.
Well, he absolutely didn't. And that is why it took so long for me to go to the Valley, because no one wanted to go and see Charlton Athletic play apart from my brother. And I think with hindsight, he probably kind of felt like it was his thing as well, and he didn't really want his little sister getting involved in this thing that he kind of saw as his own. So I think there was a little bit of that, but what he would say to me, I guess he didn't want me cramping his style either, but Not that he had much, but he would say to me, "You're going to ask too many questions. I don't want to take you because you'll ask too many questions." You know, my brother's not a horrible misogynist, nor has he ever been. I'd like to add he's a good lad, of fine character. But yeah, but this is what he used to say to me: "You'll ask too many questions, so I don't want to take you." And then what happened was, basically. It was his struggle to do my maths now, but I think it was his 21st birthday. Yeah, it was his 21st birthday. And I had gone to visit him at university for his like birthday party. And I had bought for him, I was like, so you know, when you're a teenager, back in the day, obviously, what do kids buy each other for birthday presents now? Because you can't, like, you know, DVDs and CDs aren't really a thing anymore, are they? But like, this is like the standard birthday fodder of a teenager in the 90s, early thousands, right? You buy your siblings like a CD or whatever. But I was like, it's 21st birthday. I want to buy him something like, you know, meaningful or whatever. And I know that my mum has bought him tickets to go to Charlton. So like, what if he had a really nice day out in London and I got him a ticket I bought him a pair of tickets for the London Eye. That's what I thought, like, go and do that and then go to the Valley afterwards. And I genuinely thought that this was a really thoughtful and inspired birthday present. And he was a bit drunk by the time he got it, and he opened the envelope and he looked at it and he said, "What the fuck is this?"
And that's peak London Eye as well. That London Eye's only been open for a
exactly.
year.
It was very new at that point. So I was like, yeah, who wouldn't want to go on the London Eye?
Yeah.
And he was like, I hate London and I hate heights. Like, why have you bought this for me?
But I hate looking at things.
But anyway, I thought this was a great present. Anyway, so he was obviously like extremely disparaging about it. And I was crushed, right? Like really upset, just like, oh, you know, I thought I'd done a good and I hadn't. And so to this day, I don't actually know what happened. I don't know if my mum kind of like put some pressure on him or if he just felt bad. But he was like, I was a bit of a prick about that birthday present, sort of in the cold light of day. He was like, I was a bit of a prick about that. So look, why don't you come with me? And you can have like the other ticket for the Eye, and you can have the other ticket for the football match as well. And like you can come and like be my person that gets to come to the football match with me. So that is the first time that I went to the Valley. Well, I can't even remember who we played.
That's obvious. That was obviously going to be the next question. Yeah. But it's, sometimes, I mean, it's strange. It's almost 50-50 when you talk to people. When I've talked to people for this, about half people can vividly remember who played, who scored, etc. And then the other half of people are sort of more remembering sort of how they felt and sort of the ephemera around it, and couldn't possibly, you know, even hazard a guess to what colour strip the other side were playing in. So you fall then in the you don't know who you were playing. But what do you remember about that first trip?
Oh, it was really funny because I was at uni at the time as well, in Sussex, and I'd gone out the night before and gotten like really drunk at the campus nightclub.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore, the Hot House. Sad times. But yeah, so I'd gone to the Hot House the night before and gotten really hammered, and then I'd had to like get the train into London the next day. And I remember being on the London Eye like, oh God, this is awful. Like, I can't, this is unbearable. And my brother's there at the window like, oh my God, I can see this, I can see that.
The
like,
best birthday present ever.
Like having an absolutely lovely time. And I am just like dying of this hangover. But I really vividly remember being at the match. I just haven't committed to my memory who we played against. I have looked it up for the purposes of writing my book, and I think it might have been Southampton, but I can't like say that with any kind of any certainty. But basically, I just remember being there and like just the, you know, because to a 19-year-old who had never been to a football match before. Like, I'd been to a few gigs, I've been to a few festivals or whatever, but I'd never been to a football match before. And I really remember the atmosphere of the place. I really remember, like, you know, the excitement of the crowd. And I remember, like, I think we must have gotten tickets in the family area because there were a lot of kids around, but there was a guy there who's like effing and blinding, and he realizes he's sitting very close to these small children. And he's like, "Oh, sorry, mate," and they're like, and they're all laughing, and it's great fun and whatever. I just remember, like, I honestly, it sounds ridiculous, but I felt so proud to have been given this, like, you know, for my brother to have bestowed this honour upon me that I'd fought for like, you know, a good few years by that point, and he'd bestowed this honour upon me, and I felt so proud that he'd allowed me the privilege to go and watch Charlton Athletic with him. And you know, I just fell in love with it, you know.
I do. I mean, there's a sort of acceptance there, isn't there, in terms of, you know, you're one of us, and you know, you're going along, and yeah, I totally understand that. I sort of remember the first sort of big Birmingham game I went to because I'm a Birmingham City fan. It was a night game against Blackburn, and my mum's the Birmingham fan. I think I'd been before, maybe with my dad. But like, we were really bad then. We were in League One, as we are again next year. But it was just like, I was like, oh, I'm being allowed in. You know, I'm sharing something, and yeah, it feels it's nice. And there's they don't always involve football, but there's loads of those sort of growing up moments when you're, you know, when maybe a parent buys you a drink or something like that, and you kind of feel accepted into a world when you haven't been there before. I think yeah, it's just a nice sort of feeling. So. And that's a great Charlton team as well. You know, you're the sort of that's the Kirbishley years. You're consistently mid-table in the Premier League, occasionally flirting with European football.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a bad time to get into it.
No, it was a great time, and it's, you know, and I think, like, when I was interviewing people for my book, you know, most of the people I spoke to were sort of older men and quite resigned to the fate of Charlton Athletic. Like, you know, we're never going to do that well. Like, we are kind of who we are. And actually, like, if we could be an established championship side sort of pushing for promotion every now and again, like, that'd be enough for me. That'd be fine. Like, I think that's, you know, good thing to sort of hope for and aspire to. Whereas I'm like, no, we're going to go back. Like, I want to see us back in the Premier League. Like, I want to see us like blah, 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 because that is, you know, when I came to the club, that's where we were. We were, you know, we get promoted after that brilliant playoff final, won on penalties, and we got, you know, we had a great team at the time. We had some really good players that came through the academy and continue to come through the academy. And as you say, like, South East London is sort of seen as this kind of, you know, peak kind of breeding ground for, like, you know, footballers. South East London and the suburbs of Paris, apparently. But yeah, so we had a really, really good team at the time. We had some great players. We had like Scott Parker. We had, oh gosh, now I'm going to struggle to name any of them. But we had Paolo Di Canio for a season, for God's sake. Like, mad.
I remember Jason Ewell.
Yes, Jason Ewell.
Matt Holland.
Yeah, he was there. Who else did we have? Danny Murphy played for Charlton for a bit.
Danny Mills, of course.
Danny Mills, yeah. Obviously, Lee Bowyer came through Charlton. And, and it's, you know, he was the most when he was bought. Can't remember who bought him. I guess it must have been Leeds. When Leeds bought him, he was like the most expensive teenage player at the time probably in England. But like, yeah, so it was, you know, we've had some really good kind of success stories, the club, and you know, the players coming through the academy, and and the players that we had at the time. And, the Kirbishley years, they were brilliant. But obviously the decline was pretty sharp once it happened, which is obviously at the point at which Curbs decides to go and experience pastures new. It's a very sad time.
The West Ham, didn't they?
An even sadder time.
What are the rivalries like there? Because it's not an area of London that I'm particularly sort of au fait with. You see West Ham are north of the River Tee, and Millwall are in the same sort of area.
Palace and Millwall are the ones that people talk about. I never really thought of them because we'd only played like a handful of games against each other in the time that I'd been supporting the club. So it's like I never really thought of it as too much of a rivalry. It never really bothered me. I always felt like more rivalry with Ipswich just because of my geographical location. And so I was very sad to see them promoted, as you can imagine. I'd like them to continue languishing as we have. And also West Ham felt like a rivalry because our eldest brother Stephen supported West Ham, and me and Michael supported Charlton. So we were very sad when he went to West Ham.
Does at any point for you sort of going to the Valley with Charlton, are there any games where it tips too much in towards sort of unpleasantness when you've got those sort of local rivalries, or is that what you live for and it's fine either way?
I think the tribalism in football is in men's football, because it doesn't happen so much in women's football. I think the tribalism in men's football is one of the most unsavory aspects of the game. Like I don't go in for it. It doesn't, there's some clubs that I don't particularly like, I'm only human and I don't really like Chelsea very much, for example. But the women's, the women's team, I love Emma Hayes. So loving her work there. Obviously she's now left, but I like Arsenal women's football team, but I'm not like a huge Arsenal, I don't particularly love Arsenal as a club. But so I don't really go in for the rivalry too much. But I think the thing about the Valley particularly, they have put in so much work to make it a family-friendly environment and to make it like a safe and secure environment that people feel okay. And I think the fact that in that season I became pregnant, and there were times where I went to the Valley by myself, like 6 months pregnant, to watch a football match, and I never felt unsafe. I never felt like anything bad could happen. I always felt like things there were cool. It never felt like edgy or weird. The only time I've been to a football match that did feel like that was the playoff final, when like two absolutely wankered men like fell on top of me from like the row behind, which was a deeply unpleasant experience. But like, I'm literally scarred for life. Like I've got these sort of dents in my shins where I kind of like initially went into the seats in front. So I've got like a physical reminder of the incident every day. So it's a good anecdote, whatever. It never feels edgy to me to be at the Valley. I think it's just like such a nice crowd. But then maybe there is something about the crowd being a bit older. Maybe that is part of it.
Maybe, yeah. Certainly there is an association of sort of like youth and with some more sometimes unsavoury elements of things that are going on at football. I've heard you talk before about the difficulty of convincing sort of female friends of yours to go along to the football with you. And there you say, you're happy to go along on your own, 6 months pregnant to the Valley. Because I have a much smaller difficulty. And sometimes, when I started this podcast, I had this really, I'm the sort of very lefty, liberal, probably lost some listeners just saying that, but, so I know what I'll do. I'll have this podcast about sports grounds and I'll book it completely 50-50, men and women. And I don't know what it is about grounds, or maybe, but maybe there's not that weird sort of maybe it is quite a male thing to get sentimentally attached to the same place you stand. I don't know, but or maybe it's that the environment at football isn't conducive to female fans, even though it's probably a lot better than it's been for years. We're still not there yet, where women feel very openly happy about saying, "Do you know what? Me and my friend, we're just going to go to the football together."
I think that I think there is a kind of like, I don't know, like geekery, I guess, associated a little bit. No offense, James,
No.
but I think there's like a little bit of geekery, I guess, about the kind of like, oh, I just like love the stadium, like, you know, whatever. But I mean, I do love the Valley, so I'm comfortable with that. I'm happy to be that geek. But I mean, the Valley is amazing. Like, they have a Charlton Athletic museum at the Valley as well, which you can go to on match days and like the third Friday of every month or something. That might be wrong. Definitely check that before heading down there on the third Friday of the month. But there is a website, and they have this like absolutely incredible archive of material that if I had been writing a different book, like I would have absolutely lost my mind geeking out over. Like they had like, basically when the Valley, you know, was abandoned, it was just left with everything in it, and they found all this stuff when they were kind of you know, tidying the place up, and they've got like, you know, accounts ledgers from like 100 years ago, and like, you know, stuff like that, just like really obscure random things that I think, you know, if you were ever going to write a book about the history of football or whatever, would be, it's like an incredible archive. But yeah, sorry, just taking you down an extremely geeky tangent there.
Oh, we love it though.
I did, yeah. There is an element of geekery, I think, attached to the sort of premise of it, but I think you're absolutely right that, you know, I don't think it is a world, and I think that this will change. And I've just bought a season ticket for myself and my daughter for next season. So like, there's going to be some hard lessons in life learned by this 4-year-old, but you know, you got to start early. So basically, yeah, I think that it will change over time, because obviously we are seeing so many more women getting involved on the women's side of the game. So I think we will see that picture change. But I don't think it is a world that, certainly for my generation, it wasn't like a thing. Like, I didn't know any other girls my age, maybe one friend who was quite into football, but I didn't know anyone else who was interested in it. And not many of my friends are interested in it now, because they weren't brought up in that way. And I think it's a thing that is sort of, you know, very often shared between boys and their dads. My dad was not interested in football, but my brothers were. And I came to it through them, because, you know, you're the only girl, you're the youngest of three, and you're not deciding what's on TV. You're not deciding like what happens. You're not deciding what games get played. So you're just like, you know, so you watch the football match, or you go and play on your own, and playing on your own shit, isn't it? So you watch the football match with your brothers. And that's how I came to enjoy football. But I am absolutely certain that had that not been the case, I would have no interest in football. I think like it definitely is something that I came to through my brothers and their interest in it. And I have really, really fond memories of watching World Cups with my brothers, and particularly France 98, because that is sort of the year that I really got interested in football. And yeah, like I have absolutely no doubt that I would not have that interest had it not been for my brothers.
Let's get to 1920 then, because that's what the season that your book is primarily focused upon. And
2020. 1920 was
sorry,
a while ago.
2019 to 2020, rather. Yeah.
Oh, right, I see what you mean. 1920. I was like, I'm not that
we
old.
We can talk about
sure.
Charlton just after the First World War, but I'll run out of things to say very quickly.
I won't have a huge amount to say about it.
So
yeah.
you have this fantastic sort of playoff final in 2019.
Yeah.
and you're back in the Championship. And what makes you want to write a book? Because obviously the story changes because of what's happening in the world and the pandemic, etc.
Yeah.
But what was it? Just getting back to the Championship, or what was the impetus for the book?
I had been out of love with Charlton for a period of time because it just got so depressing and miserable. Obviously, we had, it's pretty well documented the issues that we had with the ownership.
And sorry to interrupt, and some very creative fan protests of Charlton at the time as well. I loved them.
Yes, again, like it's just wild. Like people throwing like plastic pigs onto They had this whole like donor backing and stuff like that. They had like wealthy Charlton fans making donations to them apparently, and they they had like whole creative strategies and things like that. And like some of the people that I spoke to for the book were involved in like CAST, and which is the Charlton Athletic Supporters Trust, and CARD, which is the campaign against Roland Deschatter. Like I can never say his name, but Roland. They held like a funeral procession like outside the valley and stuff like that. But again, I think that really speaks to the heart of Charlton Athletic fans and how invested they are in their club. But also I think it is a very kind of local club for local people. But no, it is a very kind of like local club. And I think, the other thing that we don't really think about is, the economic impact on an area if the club goes tits up. Like, that's people's jobs, people's livelihoods, pubs nearby, like, cafes, shops, whatever, like that traffic isn't coming in anymore. So it does impact on people's lives. But I think, going back to your question. So I had fallen out of love with Charlton for a while, and obviously they were having like a really good, like Lee Bowyer had been like caretaker manager for a bit, and then because we went through like 10 managers in about 4 days, like they just kept going, and we just went through so many of them. And so Bowyer ended up there, and it was a bit like, Lee Bowyer, bit of an unsavoury background, Bowyer. Don't know how I feel about this. And then he just, I don't know what happened. He did a really good job with the resources that he had. He got us into the playoff finals. Obviously, we won. And I felt really like full of hope again about what could happen at Charlton, because, the club was up for sale. Us getting promoted made us possibly like a more kind of attractive prospect to someone who wanted to invest some cash in football. And for a while, it looked like that was going to happen, but clearly that is not what happened. I was just like really full of hope for how things might progress. And, as ever, it's the hope that kills you. It was not to be. But I think that Bowyer did an incredible job there. And I interviewed Bowyer for the book, and I have to say that he surprised me on a number of levels. And, I think he did a great job. And I think one of the things that he did more importantly, perhaps, than this, than results, was that he brought the club back together again. He brought the fans back together. And it felt like, Curb started getting involved again and coming to the Valley and, being a pundit on Charlton TV. And it all felt like it had come sort of like gloriously back to those kind of like glory days. And that is sort of why I ended up getting, but that isn't even the question you asked me. Sorry. I've gone on here forever about a load of old bollocks. I hope you're going to edit this so that I don't sound like a fool. What was I going to say? Yeah. So so why did I write the book? So basically I felt full of hope about what was going to happen at Charlton. And as a lot of these stories begin, I'd had a few pints and no dinner on a date. And I'd been saying to my brother for a while, maybe we should get season tickets for next year. And he was like, oh, look, I just don't think this is going to be like the utopia you're imagining. I think like you're going to find that all of the good players go very rapidly, and actually we've got no money and it's going to be a bit shit. And I was like, no, it's going to be great. Like, this is it. This is the ascent now. So yeah, I find myself, I've been on this date basically, and I chatted to this guy on this date, and he was like, I was telling him that I might get season tickets for Charlton. I was sort of dabbling with the idea, and he was like, "You'll see some good, you see some good quality football in the Championship. Like that'll probably be quite a nice time, And I was like, "Yeah, it will be a nice time." And I basically went home and just bought me and my brother a season ticket, and it did go really well. But so what happened basically was at the start of the season, I'd gone up to Edinburgh for work for the festival. And I had a meeting with my agent who's based up there. And we'd sat down to talk about another book idea that I'd had. And I was a bit like, I haven't really come up with the goods for her. I think like possibly she's going to sort of dump me. I don't really know how this is going to go down. And I chatted to her I was like, so I went to the playoff final and we were sort of chatting about that. And she was just like, I think this is the book you should write. I think this is the thing that you should write about because, I think that you're obviously very attached to this subject. You speak very passionately about it. And, I think there's a really nice idea here somewhere about being a season ticket holder and like the people that you encounter week in, week out kind of thing, where you will have your own seats and like, you expect to kind of see each other and blah, blah, blah. And I think that, I think this would be a really good thing for you to write about. And I was like, a book about Charlton Athletic. Are you sure, Louise? Are you sure? And she was like, yeah. And then I just went away and started writing about like my early experiences of being a fan and writing about like my sort of family side of things, and it just came very naturally, and it felt like, I don't know, it just sort of felt right. And so yeah, we went with it, and astonishingly someone picked it up.
Very good of them to do that. And the story of the season is a phenomenal start in August, and then we get the COVID break.
Yes,
that comes in sort of the end of March, and then just, I don't know, do you get unlucky? You sort of, when it starts back up, I don't know if you're not in good form. Barnsley, I remember going on an improbable run because I thought Barnsley were down. I'd gone and watched Birmingham at Barnsley, and they were on right at the rock bottom, and then they went on a run, and we got a point against Birmingham, got a point against you with like an injury time. If that doesn't go in, you're safe. It feels like everything sort of conspired against you to put you just below that sort of line on the final day.
Well, because in the end it was like an injury time winner for Barnsley, wasn't it? That saw us go down basically. So there was one goal in it. It went like right to the wire, and it's it was pretty crushing, I have to say. It's so many things went against us, and I think like the story of that season is like incredible, really, because obviously we had COVID, but before that we were bought, in inverted commas, by East, what were they called? East Street Investments or something like that. A guy called Matt Southall, who I have to be very careful not to libel. But Matt Southall and a guy who's, oh my gosh, I've forgotten his name as well. But a guy who is billed as like basically like a member of the Abu Dhabi royal family, or kind of like adjacent to. And they didn't have any money, basically. Like, there's a big falling out between the guy, I think he's called Tanoon or something like that. I can't remember his name at all. I've got a total mental block. But yeah, there's like a big falling out between the two main guys, Matt Southall and this other guy, because the other guy's like, you're spending a lot of money and you're not like, and what is going on here? And it was stuff like he bought 3 Range Rovers on like the company credit card, and this is without, like, they bought the club for £1 on the understanding that they would then stump up some cash later on. And they just went in and a lot of money got spent and no money went in. And so then there was this, and then because they didn't pass the directors test, the EFL's like owners and directors test, they didn't pass that. So then,
which is hard to fail.
Is it?
It's hard to fail that test. It really is.
So I mean, yeah, a few other, shall we say, unsavoury characters have managed to scrape through, haven't they? So they didn't pass the test, and so they were put under a transfer embargo that no one knew about, that was kept secret. That was actually kept secret from Bowyer and Steve Gallen, who was the head of like recruitment at the time. And so like they were going around trying to sort of like meet players and get deals sorted and whatever, and they didn't even know that they weren't actually allowed to do anything. So he kind of had to like beg, steal and borrow like to get players on loan. We had like Conor Gallagher for a period of time, who was fantastic for us. And obviously he got recalled by Chelsea. I don't know what the reason for that was, but when I spoke to Lyle Taylor, he kind of implied that there was something behind it. Lyle Taylor chose not to come back after Project Restart because he'd been our like star striker the season before. He'd started off really well, but he'd gotten injured on international duty, and then he was out for like a period of time. And then he came back to sort of fitness, and then he refused to come back after Project Restart, after the COVID break, because obviously people were out of contract. And the problem with Charlton was that we had so many players on short-term contracts because of the nature of, just how business had been done at the club, and them not being in a position to extend contracts and stuff. So basically, we end up in this situation where our main striker is like, no, sorry, I'm not going to play for you because I might get injured. And if I get injured, I've got this sweet deal on the cards that, to go to Forest, basically. And I don't want to jeopardise that. So no, sorry. And I think that, a lot of blame was kind of laid at his door as well. But again, I interviewed Lyle for the book, and after, he gave a really good account of himself, and I came away from it feeling like, well, I can't begrudge you that, mate. So I think, it really was difficult, and it felt like everything went against us. And there was a period of time that was, really quite stressful, where we're sort of thinking like, we don't have like an owner, we don't have like, what is going to happen. And I think, a lot of people sort of thought we were kind of on the brink again, basically.
Yeah. We've often talked about on this podcast the sort of unfairness of COVID. There was teams like Leeds and Rangers and Liverpool who hadn't won for ages and won during that COVID season and didn't get to celebrate together. But actually, it strikes me, it's just as important to be able to mourn together, really, with fans, isn't it? That when you suffer a setback like that, and you guys would have missed out on that sort of collective grief of relegation. And this, I found it so difficult, watching the games. I even forgot it was called Project Restart. In terms of watching those games when there was no fans there, and it felt so hollow. But it's just, it's just a tough time, isn't it? To have been a fan, especially when you're going. I didn't have a season ticket that year, and you did, and then that's taken away from you, and you haven't got that thing that you go into every couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, so I had a baby in the June of that year, so I was otherwise engaged, but like, yeah, and I do think that the anxiety around what was going to happen to the club kind of buffered a lot of the sadness about being relegated, because actually, like, it felt like there were bigger fish to fry. Like the club was actually like at risk, you know. And so I think that did sort of act as a bit of a buffer. And then obviously we got a new owner and things were sort of looking up again. And then, you know, that didn't really come to anything. And, you know, so we're kind of back in this sort of wilderness kind of period. But yeah, like the Project Restart thing, I think it really, you know, without the fans there, I think it really loses its sort of sense of mystery in a way. It's kind of like, and again, this is something I write about in the book, like there's a really sort of, you know, if you pass like a five-a-side match or something, there's a really kind of like distinctive sound that you associate with men playing football, like whatever, and like, you know, and then the sound of like the ball sort of like clanging against a post or like some railing, like, you know, whatever, like it's just a very kind of familiar sound that you don't really hear like over the noise of a crowd. But in this sort of COVID, when you're sort of watching it without the fans and without that background noise, it sort of really lost a sense of mystery. I thought it was kind of like, oh, this is just like a bunch of dudes kicking a ball. This is like I could just be watching a five-a-side match. Like, this doesn't feel that different without that atmosphere of that collective group of people. And I think that it must have been very, very strange to play in those matches. I think, you know, because some places sort of, I think, did Charlton do this? I can't remember, but some of them sort of piped the sound of, but you could still, you know, you could really hear the game in a way that you can't usually. And I think, yeah, there was just, it really did just lose the magic, I think.
It took, for me, it was the cricket. Listening to and realising that the international cricketers say the exact same rubbish that me and my village cricket team say. You know, so that's a nice line, or whatever it is. It's just like, I thought you would be better than this. You're at the elite, and you're just doing the same sort of shithousery that we're doing, and we're playing in, you know, the E division of Nottinghamshire. You know, it's not exactly, but yeah, it's a difficult time. I guess try and maybe finish on a positive. It's nice to hear that you're taking your daughter to the Valley next season. I guess what are your hopes from that? In terms, I guess, just that she falls in love with football and Charlton just like you have.
Yeah, I want her to be able to access this world that, you know, I have had so much enjoyment from. And I think, honestly, like I think like being involved in football is actually like, or enjoying football is actually like socially quite useful. Like, it's quite a useful thing to have in your arsenal, to be like, you know, in a workplace environment or whatever, blah, 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 you're talking to, it's something that you can actually like relate to people who you might not ordinarily have loads to say to. So I actually think it's like genuinely a useful social tool as well as anything else. But I want it to be completely normal to her to engage with it, to enjoy it, to see, you know, I want to kind of model for her, I guess, what wasn't really modeled for me by my parents. I just want it to be something that she can enjoy. And I've taken her to a couple of women's football matches already. And she's like enjoyed those experiences, I think mostly for the sausage rolls, to be honest. But yeah, like, you know, she's enjoyed those experiences, and I just want it to be a very ordinary part of her world. So that's what I hope for. And also, you know, a Charlton Athletic season ticket is very cheap. And if you're if you're an adult paying like full price and your kid's under 11, their season ticket is actually free. So, like, you know, Yeah, so even if we go to like 10 matches, that's like a day out for 30 quid. So it's, that's not bad. That's not bad in London, I would say. So yeah, I hope that she will enjoy it. She's possibly a little bit on the young side, but I I hope that she will enjoy it and she will get something from it.
I took my daughter when she was 4 to her first game, which was a women's FA Cup match, Forest versus Man City. And Man City won 8-0. And she didn't care. She comes away. She still chants, Forest. She loved it. And she went to the England Sweden semi final in the Euros. And we were at the wrong end for like the goals, but we were at the right end to watch sort of Mary Earps make some amazing
Yeah,
saves, and so Mary Earps is her favourite player now.
Mary
And
Epps.
but and then I think we did the finalissima, the England Brazil game at
Mm.
Wembley. So she's been to a few, but I've completely screwed myself because she now tells me that she doesn't want to watch boys football. She just loves girls football, and she just doesn't. She's got no interest in watching boys play football. And
See,
she's 6, and I can't win an argument with a 6-year-old.
I mean, I love that, and I love the way that also I know quite a lot of women who have no interest in men's football at all, never have done, no interest in football, no interest in men's football, don't want to go and watch a men's game, but they have started to love women's football because they kind of see it as like symbolic of something that is really meaningful. And I think, the way that the Lionesses have played and the things that they have achieved has felt really meaningful to like my generation of women. And I think that, I love that Lyra can go to those matches and I love that she's enjoyed them. And I really want her to just be like, to grow up and it just be totally normal to see women playing sport. And, I kind of, because I just feel like it's this world. I always felt in my kind of love of football that I'd been sort of invited into this sort of, or my love of sport in general, that I'd sort of found this like hidden thing, this world that I'd managed to sort of like gain access to. And then I just wanted everyone else to know about it. I wanted all my friends to know how good it was. I wanted everyone to feel as enthusiastic about it as I did. And I want that for Lyra as well. I want her to be able to be part of that world and it just be completely normal.
I think it will be, and who knows? Maybe in the future she'll even see a few successful Charlton Athletic seasons. You
Maybe in
never know.
20 years' time, that's sort of roughly how long they make us wait for it, sort of in 20 years, sort of bursts of activity. So yeah, no, I feel positive about next season. I do feel positive about it. The new manager seems to have done a pretty good job at the end of the season. If they give him any money over the summer, like, fingers crossed, he might be able to do something with it. But, the problem is that it will never be enough money because you need to be owned by billionaires for it to be enough money. And then even sometimes, Roland, he wasn't short of a bob or two. That didn't go down so well. So you need to be owned by billionaires who actually have an active interest in the running of your club, basically.
Thank you very much, Jen. I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. There was so much there. There was, I think, the story of how her fandom intertwines with her brother's fandom, and two Charlton fans, one West Ham fan, growing up in Ipswich. It's quite the tangled web they weave. But I really enjoyed hearing from Jen. I really hope her and her daughter have a fantastic season at the Valley in League One, and she gets a lovely introduction to being a football fan. And as I said right at the beginning, I love the Valley. I think it's just a nice ground. I don't know that anyone that has a bad sort of word to say about it, and I think it's appropriately sized. I think it's a good club, good people there, and they've been through a lot over the last few years. She touched on all the ownership stuff, the fan protests, and yeah, it would be fine if Charlton could just have, a quiet decade If they could just focus on the on-field stuff rather than worrying about all the off-field stuff, that would be fantastic for them. Next week, we've got a fantastic guest again. We've got the journalist Henry Winter, who you'll know from The Times and I think The Telegraph before him. A mad keen England fan, and with the Euros around the corner, the perfect guest to speak to. Until next time.